Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Arturia Matrix-12-V tutorial series. We're going to have a look at a couple of sections today. We'll finish off on the ramps section, but it refers to vibrato, so I want to have a look at the vibrato settings first. Let's head over to the Voices tab, and here the vibrato section is. Now, this has actually been active pretty much the entire time of this tutorial series so far. If I ever increase the modulation wheel, you're going to get vibrato. Let's do that now. So at the moment, the vibrato wheel is all the way down. It's lever number 1. Press a key. Increase the modulation wheel to full, and there you can hear the vibrato kicking in. So let's have a look at how that works. I'll turn the overall volume right down so that it's really quite quiet in the background, and I can talk over the top of it. The speed of the vibrato, pretty obvious. Pull the speed down. And similarly, the wave shape is also very straightforward. Almost all vibrato takes the sine wave or triangle shape, but you do have the options for some of the others. The only one missing, by the way, is sample and hold. So you could basically treat vibrato like a 6th LFO. It just basically has a reduced feature set. Now, the reason we're able to increase and decrease vibrato from the mod wheel is the bottom right hand section. So this mod amount determines how much the modulation wheel is allowed to impact the change. So if I turn the mod wheel all the way up full and the mod amount to 0, just double click. Now when I press a key, we get no vibrato. Increase the mod amount, and there you can hear the depth. So this is the amount of pitch variance that the vibrato is allowed to impose. So between depth and speed, we're pretty much there. But in addition to the modulation wheel being able to change the depth, we can also dial in some permanent modulation. So I'll set the mod amount to about 40, so that when the wheel is maximum, got this much. Now I'll turn the wheel all the way down to 0 and increase some fixed amplitude. So that amount of vibrato is going to happen all the time. And now my modulation wheel simply accentuates. So those two modulation amounts are being summed together for one total overall control voltage output. I always talk about control voltages in these terms because when you try to think of multiple different sources all joining together, it can become really confusing until you remember that coming out at the other end is just a single number. How much of this thing do you want to do? Well, 21 in the virtual kind of very abstract world of 0 to 63 is an amount, 40 is another amount. Add those two things together, you're going to get a third total sum amount. I'm very deliberately trying to avoid saying 61 because, you know, a lot of these controls are logarithmic, and so it's a little bit difficult to kind of leap to conclusions as to what your output is going to be. Just use these things. So here we are with our modulation amount. I'm going to set it to square wave in order to demonstrate the lag feature, and the reason I've set it to square is that the lag is another one of these situations where it's not the master lag processor. It's got nothing to do with the main interface lag processor. This is a dedicated lag processor for just the vibrato section, and it's really, really subtle. So let's get it going. Need to turn it up a bit for this. Now I'm going to introduce lag. Hear that little flick? That's a smoothing of the modulation at the beginning of the square wave. So you basically just get in this kind of this blurring of the modulation amount being applied on every period of the cycle. And it doesn't matter what the speed of the vibrato is, it's always going to sound the same. If I slow it right down, you're still going to get that little flick. Now when I switch back to triangle mode, you're going to hear just how subtle this is because you're going to struggle to even identify it at all. So it's basically unnoticeable. I wouldn't get too concerned about whether or not to use the lag feature. I generally don't turn it on. But like I say, for square waves where the changes are so abrupt and harsh, it just introduces that little bit of smoothing. Finally, we've got a modulator into the speed of the vibrato. So if I set the source down here to poly pressure, this is how hard I press into a key. So if I increase the modulation amount from here, this poly pressure module is plugging as a modulator into the speed of the vibrato. So I'll press a key quite lightly. So there's no poly pressure being applied there. Now I'll dig in, and there's me speeding up. If I increase the modulation amount, that effect is going to get more dramatic. Light key, and then I'll press deeply in. There we go. Thrown all those changes away and got us back to our default preset again, and I've made sure that my mod wheel is turned all the way down. Now let's have a look at ramps. A ramp, in many ways, is like a very simplified lag processor. And when we were talking about lag processors, I said that you could think about those as a one-stage envelope. It's kind of the same kind of principle. You've basically got something starting at 0, going to a non-zero value over a period of time. These ramps are actually logarithmic, but it doesn't matter. And that's all they do. They increase a control voltage from 0 to a non-zero value over a period of time. Well, that's very similar to the definition that we applied to a lag processor. The difference is we don't have any of the additional complexity. The lag processor, as we saw, have quite a number of inputs and outputs, and there's features in here such as the legato and the equal time. We haven't got any of that. They're really, really quite simple. We've got 4 of them, and believe it or not, shock horror, I'm going to plug ramp 1 into our VCO1 frequency. So here's my VCO1 frequency selected. Let's pick ramp 1, increase the modulation amount. When I press the key, we get a modulation amount being applied to VCO1 frequency, which is increasing the pitch over a period of time specified by this rate. So turn it down, it's faster. Turn it up, it's slower. So it operates the same way as the lag rate. But of course, in just the same way as we saw with the lag processor, they don't have to be plumbed in to their ultimate destination directly. We could go via an LFO. So if we plug the LFO into the oscillator frequency instead, now we're controlling the pitch from this LFO over here. Increase the amount. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to map a ramp into the LFO1 speed. So every time I press a key, the LFO is going to start off slowly and then get faster. You'll tend to find that these ramp rates are very top-end heavy. So I've just had to increase that to 60 to get a nice kind of stretched out effect. Where we were at 50, it happens very quickly. If I bring the ramp amount down, I'm having a less dramatic effect. So once again, this is multiple control voltages all being summed together for a total effect. So basically just play with your different amount controls in order to salt to taste. Now if I increase this amount, the source amount from this point onwards, it's going to increase the control voltage being fed into the LFO1 speed, basically turning the speed up more and more, and so the overall static speed once the ramp's done its thing is going to get faster and faster, a little bit like your sustain level in the envelope. You know, we're talking about a one-stage envelope here. Ultimately, it's going to get to the end of its journey. From that point onwards, it's just a simplified control voltage. So, it's me getting faster and faster and faster. There's me hitting maximum speed. Here's me increasing the maximum speed. Throw all those changes away and get us back to our default. in its sound. Now we're going to have a look at the page 2 options. There are 2 extra settings. Well, I say there are 2. I'm only going to talk about one of them today. I feel like I'm being left out of a club. There's something going on with single and multi retriggers in this synthesizer that I simply do not understand. I've been through every preset in this synth. There's about 4 or 5 of them that use this multi option, and for the life of me I can't hear any difference regardless of how many keys I press, what I do. Turning this thing on and off just doesn't seem to make any difference. The manual is this helpful: select single or multiple trigger response. That doesn't mean a thing to me, so I'm just going to basically ignore that setting. I just don't know what it does. LFO trig, however, we can have a look at that one. What I'm going to do is tie the VCO1 frequency directly back into the ramp again, increase the amount. There's our ramp. Now I'm going to make this ramp re-trigger off an LFO in just the same way that you can apply a trigger to an envelope to get the envelope to fire over and over again periodically. You can do exactly the same with the ramp. So I'm going to engage LFO trig mode. I'm going to jump over the gated section for the moment. So it's connected to LFO1, which means the speed of LFO1, and it's only the speed, is going to determine how often the ramp re-triggers. So it's going to be quite quick at the moment at a speed of 48. If I bring the speed of the LFO down, you can hear those re-triggers occurring more slowly. So the overall speed of the ramp is being controlled from the ramp 1 rate. Which gets slower as you turn it clockwise, and the LFO is determining the re-trigger rate, and fantastically that gets slower as you turn it anti-clockwise. And now we've pretty much got it balanced so that the speed of the ramp is terminating its journey, it's reaching its fixed sustained control voltage value just about the time when the LFO re-triggers. It does its thing, and so we get a constantly pulsing ramp. Doesn't matter what the shape of the LFO is, it's just a timing pulse. We're not taking any direction from the shape of the LFO, we're taking our direction from the ramp, and that's, at the moment, it's a positive logarithmic value. If I change the modulation amount to negative, we'll go backwards. Doesn't matter, again, what the LFO shape is. We can control the re-triggering of these ramps from the vibrato, and that's why we started there today. I'll turn this knob all the way up. So there we go through the 5 LFOs, and right at the end we've got a vibrato. So now the speed of the vibrato is going to determine the re-triggering of the ramp modulation. The vibrato is an LFO just like anything else. It's got a speed. It can be used as a trigger. Okay, let's have a look at this gated. I'll just put it back to LFO1 so that we can see what's going on. Now, in order to show you what gated does, I'm going to give us some release on this envelope. So I'm going to turn my release up so that when I press a key and let it go, the sound continues in the background. Did you also hear that the ramp was still doing its thing to the VCO frequency? Let's listen again. Let go of the key now, and there's the gate still firing. If I engage gated, it means that the trigger, the LFO trigger, is only going to affect the ramp while I've got the key held down. So now when I let the key go, we won't get any refiring of the ramp. So here's my key pressed down. I'll let it go in 3, 2, 1. And you get a gentle, the release cycle continues on the envelope, but there's no longer any re-triggering of that VCO1 modulation. And that's the ramp section covered. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you next time. Thanks very much for watching.